My name is Peter Wolfhorst. I'm an extension educator with Penn State Extension, and I'll go to the. Okay. We're here today, myself and a few other colleagues, to talk about a program we did through an AARP grant called Intergenerational Community Engagement and Planning, Values and Practices. The agenda for the next 25 minutes, I'll be talking briefly about inclusive communities. I'm Matt Kaplan. We'll talk about what is intergenerational. Linda Falcone, One Community, Many Generations. Matt will then talk about ways to engage using the survey that we did part of this process. John Turek, Taking Action, which was at the end of this process, and then community engagement with Neil Fogel. I am an extension educator with Penn State Extension, county-based educator in Pike County, northeastern PA. So here's the team, and I'll let them introduce each of them introduce themselves. I also added Tanya Lema, who's here today from North Carolina State Extension. She was part of our team in the beginning, and then in December, she left Penn State Extension to go to NC State Extension. So I'm going to talk about livability, or the themes of livability from the AARP's perspective of inclusive communities. And we kind of used these ideas to put together our survey that we're going to talk about today with this program. And so I don't have a lot of time to talk about each of these individually, but there is kind of similar characteristics that relate from a livability perspective in these themes, and it's really access. And so in our communities with different populations, access for things such as nice housing, affordable housing, having neighborhoods where you have access to resources and services, access to transportation. If you don't have a car, or there are communities in a livable community that you can get from point A to point B. Having a clean environment. A lot of our communities have certain populations, maybe age or socioeconomic status, that sometimes are in areas where there are not clean environments. Health is important, having access to good, affordable, quality health care, foods, exercise opportunities, engagement, be able to, in a community, have access to civic involvement with others, maybe having some social interaction. We know humans are social creatures, be able to interact with others. And then finally, in a livable community or inclusive community, the access for opportunities to make a living, a good living, be able to move your way up the ladder or have the opportunity to get job opportunities that allow you to be able to afford things that are mentioned previously in some of these other factors. So now I'm going to turn over to Matt. He's going to talk about this project, One Community, Many Generations, the generational part of it. Matt?
Thank you, Peter. Hello, everyone. So I guess before introducing the project, we thought we would spend a moment or two talking about the first word of our title, which is intergenerational. So, and also looking at livability from an intergenerational lens, we definitely want to make sure we're on the same page with looking at this. What does this mean? So just very briefly, my task is to distinguish between these three words: mono, multi, and intergenerational settings. So this is an image of an outdoor park space that's designed with a monogenerational lens. And basically there are things to do, but it's not really, there isn't really a mix of active and passive recreation and things to do that would appeal to a multi-generational audience. So next slide. So now here's where the confusion comes sometimes, difference between multi and inter. Okay, so this is more of a multi-generational setting. So there are many things to do. Generally, the site is welcoming for multiple generations. People can be there. There's some universal design principles. We could say that it's age-friendly. People can come over. However, to make it intergenerational, we would need to tweak it a bit. So next slide. So to include in the design effort principles and I guess opportunities for people to not only be there, but to engage one another. So on the bottom right, for instance, it's a sandbox. So what would it take for a much older person to really delve into the sandbox? Maybe they don't want to be in the sand. So a seat modified environment a little bit so they could be there and engage the young person in the sandbox. So it's the which is the connection between, the communication between co-learning, co-exploring the community, and co-action for the community, and the conceptual framework by which the project, our project here, is based upon. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kaplan. I'm Linda Falcone. I'm from Northeastern Pennsylvania. And when we saw Dr. Kaplan's presentation about intergenerational, our team got together, although we missed Tanya, she was with us on our adventure here. We wanted to find out if we could come up with a way to help smaller or communities that lack resources and don't have the expertise and time to do the development of data collection. How could we come in and help them with the back end and teach them how to create more intergenerational activities in their community? Next slide. So we went to our favorite intergenerational site, which is AARP. And each spring, AARP has a grant opportunity for the community challenge. And in 2020, right as COVID hit, we applied for this grant. The grant is meant to do intergenerational planning in a community, but it's meant to take it to the next level because it requires that a community complete a quick action project. So the timeline of the grant is from August until December. So we applied in the spring and we were notified in August that we got the grant. But the whole point is to teach communities, our project is to teach communities how to not only find out what's of concern to people, but also to generate that action plan. Next slide. So the goal of our grant was to develop a tool to capture data from a wide range of people in the community. We started at the high school level. So we created a survey and we had from high school to retired and gathered that feedback from the community. And then we created a package to go with the survey where we teach the community not only to take the data and look at it and understand it, but also to create those quick action plans so that they result in age-friendly public amenities. We looked at 6 areas: quality of place, diversity and inclusion, business and economy, housing, community services, and transportation. So a little tweaking after our pilot project, but although there's 6 categories, we have over 90 components of a community that we assess as part of that survey. It is a Qualtrics survey, so it can be done on a handheld device while walking around the community, or it can be done on paper for anybody who might not have the capabilities or the access to the technology. Next slide. So the benefits of the program are that you have now a tool to capture the concerns of people of different ages from your community. So there's a lot of data that results from the survey itself. And then the package teaches people how to create the quick action projects. And John's going to talk more about that after Matt speaks again. Once a community knows their top concerns and has learned to develop these action projects where they are outlining what they need to do, then they have a good foundation to go seeking funding for grants or from the community to get these projects done. Next. So the package consists of a guidebook, which is online, and there's no charge for that. Actually, there's no charge for any of this because of the AARP grant. So there's the guidebook, which details what the project is. There's a sample flyer to help the community recruit people to take the survey. There are the event materials, and those consist of basically 4 parts. The first is a kickoff PowerPoint, which explains what this is and what's going to happen. And then there's the survey link that will go to that individual community where they can share it out as they want to. And then there's the results from the Qualtrics that they get back and can analyze. And then there's a PowerPoint that walks a community through how to do an action forum, how to take those concerns and actually turn them into projects, and how to do it in a relatively quick and easy way. So we were awarded the grant in August. In September, we worked with our pilot community to come up with a leadership team of people from high school to retirement. And we brought them together in September, and Neil did a great job of presenting to them and getting buy-in from the community. And at that event, we talked to them about how to distribute that survey and to get people from the community to answer it. Because obviously the more responses you get, the better information you're going to have. So we kicked it off in September. In that meeting, they decided to use an event that was already existing in their town because of COVID. But Matt's going to share with you some great ideas on how to create intergenerational activities. So we did this in conjunction with something that was already going on because of COVID. And we had 110 people start the survey, 56 completed it. We tweaked the survey and brought it down to a few less components, and a few took about 5 or 10 minutes off of the survey. So, but it still has a lot of great data in it. And then in November, we called anybody who wanted to participate, who took the survey or who was on the leadership team, to come to an action forum. And using the results, they picked some key topics and they created action plans. And by December 15th, the end of the grant, they had completed their action project for their community. So if you are interested in using this in your community, I put the link in. If you can't remember in the future, just Google Penn State Extension One Community Guidebook, and you can read through it, and you can contact Neil or any one of us if you would like to move forward. So now I'd like to turn it back over to Matt and let him talk to you about ways to engage your community.
Okay, thank you, Linda. So just a few slides, just to really zero in on what's going on intergenerationally. So it's not just a matter of bringing a mixed age group together, lecturing them, or getting their opinion on preconceived notions. So here are like 5 thematic steps. And our model, the model we're talking about here, is just one way to do it. I'll show you a couple more slides, different ways in which we considered, and we may still yet infuse into the project. All right, so the first step, you need some sort of a method for helping people across generations become aware of each other's views and experiences. In this project, we used the survey, which was shared already. And we'll hear more about that. Then you need a method and a venue for people to discuss similarities and differences. And that was in the project as well. And then from there needs to be a pivot towards identifying sites or issues where there is agreement. So obviously, people have things on their mind and they don't really understand where or why they should pay attention to other residents' issues. So it's a process. They're starting to find out what other people care about and finding the sweet spot between their interests and others' interests, figure out an action plan, and then to make it happen, needing to choose one priority site or 2 or issues as a focal point for an action, and then actually plan and implement the project. And that's kind of the system we did here. Next slide. So just a couple of slides. So we're really talking about intergenerational placemaking. Some methods we considered were like the walkabout, talk about model. Here's from Hawaii, a project that I was involved in. Next slide. Okay, participatory planning from my dissertation research many, many years ago. Actually having people talk about in a visioning way, what would they like their community to look like in the future? So using models, maps, and so on. And basically the framework, just to keep in mind and simplify things, people come into a community planning setting with a feeling of this is my community, here are my views about the community, please listen to me, I know what I want. So then they're listening to how other people see their community and what they would like to see. So that's your community. So my community, your community, and then the sweet spot is the our community, because we're really trying to build a caring, cohesive community. That's the ultimate goal, I think, of planning. So by hashing these things out and trying to find a joint vision for the future, that's the our community. And in this project, if we go to the next slide, the our community, by analyzing the survey results, according to generation, we were able to present this kind of a slide to generate action as a pivot. To say, look, you all know what you wanted. Here are some themes and questions that come into play after looking at your generation specific comments and your personal comments. You actually have a lot in common. In fact, you all agree that you want more people to come to this community and that there should be more ways to get people to stay and play. So here are some themes that came up, and it's based on what they felt they wanted and would argue for and actually show up and volunteer for. And not only them and their friends, but expanding their social networks and being more connected and less socially isolated, which we know is terrible for young people and older adults. So it's helping with the mental health of people, building community, and it's a process to improve the community. And we were forced to do it in a socially or physically distanced way, which is why I think the surveys and how we used them was really eye-opening, and certainly I learned tons from the project. Okay, thank you.
The community action event that Linda alluded to came after the survey results, and these are the things that we discussed over Zoom with the community. The survey, as Linda mentioned, at a public event, we had get the app on their phone and do the survey. We had a few at that action event that did paper copies that we integrated those results into the Qualtrics survey. This is just a slide looking at what people felt in the community needed to be improved. So you can see local economy, quality of place, downtown business area, and you'll see one of the action item that they did, how it relates to that. So it seems like economy and getting people jobs were an important part of this community. So I'll turn it over to John to talk about the action.
Yeah, so we did this action forum, and I don't know how many of you have worked in communities before, but strategic planning is not always easy. If you've heard of strategic doing, please raise your hand on the screen. I'm curious how many have. Next slide, Peter. It's a program by Ed Morrison, and we found this wonderful quote that applies so many places. You know, if you wanted to take a read of it, a small group of civic leaders attempt to drive a community in a specific direction. It rarely works for the simple reason that no one can tell anyone else what to do. So we use this tool to try to get folks to take action quickly. Next slide, Peter. These are the general roles: establish civic spaces for complex thinking, guide conversations with appreciative questions, link and leverage assets to define opportunities, convert opportunities into clear measurable outcomes, connect our outcomes to small next steps, and experiment continuously with pilot projects, and then press on regardless. So next slide. These are some of the things that you use to evaluate. How will the community be transformed? What will change? What evidence will you have that you made a difference? What will people see, feel, or do that will be different? Next slide. And this is the core of strategic doing. What could we do? What should we do? What will we do? And then when will we get back together? Next slide. Throughout our process, we had to comply with COVID. So everything was virtual except for the one event. I'm going to have a few sample slides here of the Jamboard exercises that we used. If you want to come back to them later, go ahead. Next slide. That was project prioritization. This was the actual results whenever we did put up projects that the folks could volunteer to work on. You could see benches and awnings on the main street got the most virtual sticky dots. Next slide. We also gave them some tools for more detailed planning and took them through an exercise. Next slide. That's a simplified version of the previous slide. Again, you can look at this once conference is over. This was actually the step-by-steps that we used that came out of the event. And next slide. They ended up investing in these concrete benches to create an intergenerational space in the downtown. Next slide. Okay, and this is where I sum up. There were 240 volunteer hours donated. Borough officials and volunteers started working on a marketing plan. A design committee was formed. And this is back about 2 months ago, the amount of volunteer time that's been put together. And the community has applied for at least 2 community improvement grants, probably more. They're now working on an active transportation plan as well. So next slide. Neil?
Okay, thanks, John. Yeah, I'm just going to kind of wrap up and talk about some overall issues you want to think about when you do community engagement. These are some of the guiding principles from a engagement guide that was done a number of years back through Penn State for the Center for Rural Development in Pennsylvania. Very similar to the work we do in Extension. The basis is to increase people's knowledge, but you want to incrementally get it up to that they do something with it, that there's a difference made. So it's going from the just increasing knowledge to hopefully they increase their knowledge on their own as a result of what you do as far as setting that engagement up. Then they use it to address something in the community or the specific identified problem, then to create future opportunities for more engagement. So one thing leads to another, and that they're actually used or implemented to make a difference in the community. Next. Just one of the key things that I think is often lost, particularly from a lot of state and local agencies, is a lot of organizations have a public meeting and think that is community engagement, which it certainly is not. It's not engagement unless it's a two-way street. I've just as an example, I'm going back years ago, but there was a public engagement meeting that was done by a state agency, and it was not engagement. Basically, it was just listening, which was fine, but if the intent is engagement, there has to be a two-way, and the meeting did not go well at all. So again, just by giving out information doesn't mean that it's a community engagement meeting. And there's a lot of ways to do that. We do have resources that are available as part of some of the additional slides that will be made available. We do have links to different resources that are out there. Some have been mentioned already. There's some additional ones, not only articles, but some information relative to actually going through the questions you want to think about when you want to do a community engagement type projects, and setting goals. How do you meet those goals, and who should be involved? Those types of issues. And I think the nice thing about that worksheet is that it forces you, so to speak, to look at those items versus just going, haphazardly. So with that, I guess I'll turn it back to Peter.
Okay, actually, we are kind of at the end of our time for our first presentation. So I don't know if Peter, you and your team maybe want to put your emails in the chat so people can reach out to you with any questions they have. Otherwise, if we have questions or extra time left at the end of the session, then maybe we can come back to that.
Yeah, I'm going to stop sharing. So.
Okay, alrighty. So our next presenter is Lauren from West Virginia University, and Lauren's going to be talking, the title of Lauren's presentation is My Hometown is Cool, Engaging Youth in Community Development and Entrepreneurial Thinking. So you should be able to go ahead and share your screen, Lauren.
Okay, thank you. All right, can everybody see that? Okay, perfect. All right, thank you everyone. I'm Lauren Prinzo. I'm an extension specialist in community and economic development with West Virginia University. And my colleagues Mike Doherty and Daniel Eads are also here to co-present this short session here today. Mike and Daniel, would you like to introduce yourselves?
I'm Michael Doherty. I'm an extension professor and specialist at WVU, and have been working in community development there for a little over 25 years.
Daniel Eads. I'm a rural development specialist at WVU. I've been here a little over 10 years.
All right, thank you. So the program that we'd like to talk to you about today is called My Hometown is Cool. And it's a statewide initiative that's aimed at engaging youth in both asset-based community development and entrepreneurial thinking, and kind of the overlap of the two, which we're going to talk to you a little bit about here today. So there's two components of the program. The first is we've developed a lesson series that's targeting 6th through 12th grade students, which is a series of 4 lessons. And then we've also developed a statewide pitch competition model where youth can share ideas for their communities. So this project includes a ton of cross collaboration and different expertise from different areas across the university. Within WVU Extension, Mike and Daniel and I are all with the Family and Community Development Unit. And there's also strong collaboration and support from 4-H and Youth Development, as we're kind of mixing those two areas and engaging youth. Also working with the WVU Chambers College of Business and Economics with their Launch Lab, their Encova Center, and the Dean's Office to pull in the economic development and entrepreneurship partnerships. West Virginia Health Science Technology Academy, which engages 800 youth across the state. Many of whom are first generation, or soon to be first generation college students. The West Virginia University Student Media Association, helping to create and edit videos, and additional public and private sponsors, including the West Virginia Association of Counties, private businesses, and others who partner to bring this project to life in West Virginia. So My Hometown is Cool kind of combines the elements of entrepreneurial thinking and community development. And our team sees a lot of overlap between these two areas. Some general principles of entrepreneurial thinking that can easily be applied to community development are the principles of starting with what you have and taking the first step. So one analogy that we use when we're discussing this kind of approach to community development is one from Babson University, which is the puzzle versus the collaborative quilt. So if we think of community development as a puzzle, in a puzzle, the end is defined. So if we work with our community and create a vision for what we need and we map out all the details, that would be kind of the puzzling process. We know what the end is going to look like. And now we go about pulling together the pieces and the resources to try to accomplish that well-defined vision that we're all pursuing. And then success ultimately is defined by accomplishing that vision that we've all agreed on in the beginning. So the problem with the puzzle approach, of course, is that we have a scarcity of resources in many of the communities that we work with, especially rural communities. So when we start with the end well-defined, it's often the case, we have a puzzle that's missing some pieces. So the ability to reach that end goal is hindered by some of the things that we're struggling with within the community. So conversely, collaborative quilt approach, applying entrepreneurial thinking, we would work to define the shared goal and then start with the assets. What do we have here that we can pull from, and what can we build on to increase our capacity? And this approach would embrace iterative development, flexible, open to opportunities, and moving in whatever direction is most advantageous for the team. So how this might be applied in real life, if a group got together with the goal of increasing access to after-school programming for youth, and this is a common conversation in rural communities in our state, one approach would be to define that a community center is the correct solution, map it out, where it would be, what it would look like, what it would include, it would cost, how we would recover funding for sustainability, and really define what that community center is going to look like in our community, and then work together to bring those resources together to accomplish that community center. Applying entrepreneurial thinking and the collaborative quilt approach, we would instead focus on the shared goal, first off, of serving youth and having something for them to do after school. This might start with just an extra room at a school or the basement of a church that immediately began serving youth and then pulled on additional resources and partners to grow and expand as those opportunities became available. And ultimately, the point we've done this with actual puzzles and actual strips of fabric as a activity for kids and adults. And when you look at the collaborative quilt kind of process of community development, the key point is that there is not one correct answer in our communities. So we, rather than defining and finding one correct answer, being open to the fact that the same goal could be accomplished in 15 different ways, depending on the strengths that the group brings to the table, is embracing that entrepreneurial thinking, community development. I'll turn it over to Daniel.
Awesome. Thanks, Lauren. So, what we ask the youth to do in this program is to talk about the things that they're most excited about with their community. So we wanted to do the same with you. Just we thought that might be fun. So we've got this slide that has some things that we, or at least I, love about West Virginia. I grew up in the southern part of the state near the New River Gorge. So we have the largest steel arch span bridge in the Western Hemisphere. Down below it there, we've got the Green Bank Observatory, the largest steerable radio telescope in the world. We've got one of our favorite foods there, the pepperoni roll. So I don't know how many people are familiar with that. If you're in Maryland, you can find them, but they're in the refrigerated section. So West Virginia has made sure not to pass any law that would prevent our meats from having to be refrigerated in gas stations. And down below that, we've got two of our local cryptoids, the Mothman and the Flatwoods Monster, enjoying another West Virginia favorite, a hot dog there. And it's got to be, if you're from Southern West Virginia, you've got to have a hot dog with chili and coleslaw on it. And then we've got some more of our natural resources and outdoor recreation resources showcased with the Mon Forest Towns, which West Virginia University Extension is intimately involved with. So everybody throw one thing in the chat that you love about your hometown or your state. All right, we got sand dunes and beaches. I think John said that they've got pepperoni rolls there too. Oh, this is good. All right, the True False Film Festival in Columbia, Missouri. That sounds exciting. All right, this is good. So we've got a lot of natural resources. We've got some cultural resources. Cherry Blossom Festival, the Winter Ice Carnival. Awesome. The Storytelling Festival, get more cultural stuff. Excellent. Tammy in Virginia there. Moncello and Mishi Tavern. I guess that's how you say that. Awesome. Well, good. So hopefully everybody was able to do this exercise pretty easily, right? Hopefully you have something that you're excited about the place that you live. Lauren, can you bump to the next slide for me? All right, so most of the time with the communities that we're working with, this is not how local leaders think, and it's not how the youth think either. So West Virginia, our joke, I don't know if we have anybody from Mississippi here. If you do, I apologize. But our joke is always, thank God for Mississippi, because they keep us from being 50th, except when they don't. Oftentimes we get to go back and forth, right? So you can see some of the rankings for West Virginia as a state. 48th and 49th in income rankings, 50th in educational attainment, 50th in new business startup density, losing population faster than any other state, right? So not necessarily things that you want to be proud of. The problem though, right, when we start with these negative statistics in mind, our public, private, nonprofit, human service systems, often supported by research that we're doing in the university, they translate those needs into programs and activities that teach people really just the nature and extent of their problems, right? And then we get to say, well, our value is solving these problems. So residents have a tendency to start to view themselves as clients and consumers of our research and our best practices. And ultimately, right, we get this fragmentation in program delivery as people start competing for grant dollars. We're service providers rather than engaging the residents in tackling their own problems. and we deepen this cycle of dependence. So how can we get beyond that? Lauren, can you hit the next one for me? So the alternative path, and you guys all know this, right? The path that is most in line with Extension's mission is to develop programs and activities based on the capacities and skills and interests and assets that our communities have and our community members have. So the hard truth is that these top-down, outside-in strategies aren't ultimately going to be effective, especially for our rural places, which aren't able to access a lot of outside funding, who aren't going to be able to attract large-scale job-providing industries. And also, we just have evidence, again, I think a lot of it generated within Extension, that shows that human and community development occurs when people are committed to investing in themselves and investing their resources in the effort. So this slide is one that I really like. It's got people that we work with on a regular basis. The top right there, that's Mary and her husband Chico. They're my farmers. I do their CSA. Big Timber Brewing Company, one of our more popular breweries that not only does a good job selling locally, but has awesome distribution channels. Some of our human capital assets, Matt Hogger down there, he is in Tucker County, which is just a few hours from greater DC metro area. He actually works there, does some work with Microsoft, and his wife, Emily, is a program director for a CDFI in the area. So great human capacity. He did all the website design for a local bouldering group. That's where I pulled this picture. So, again, thinking about how can we get communities to recognize folks like Matt and Emily, folks like their cultural traditions that you all identified, and how can they leverage those? And again, more importantly, not just how can communities do that, but how can we get youth to recognize those resources? So I'm going to turn it over to Mike now.
Okay. Well, the question then becomes, how do you translate this from the idea to a program that you can share with the youth? And a few years ago, there was a lesson called My Hometown is Cool and So Is Yours. And what we've done is break that out into a 4-lesson series, expanded upon it. The first lesson is just defining the concept. It's an expanded, updated version of the original. The second one, what makes my hometown cool, has students start thinking a little bit more about the topic. It focuses on the community capitals. If you're familiar with that construct by Flora and Flora, we have them thinking in those terms. And so they start looking at where they live differently. The third lesson, making my hometown cooler, then takes that, the information they've gained and start thinking, okay, how do we focus this? How do we build upon our existing assets? And the fourth, sharing my ideas for my hometown, is essentially, once you've come up with the ideas, going out and presenting it. Because you might have, unless you work with others to get things done, nothing will happen. So that's essentially the lessons are there. We have a leader guide for them. There's pre-recorded material. The focus again is on youth. It's a hands-on series for them. It's an application of ideas. We've delivered this was delivered this year because of our partnership with HISTA to 850 students. It can be done equally as well in person or via distance technology, which is beneficial for us because we have a state where you can literally be 10 miles from somebody and it takes an hour because of mountains, and that's only a slight exaggeration. So thinking of how we want to deliver this in the most effective way, it can be done in either process. So once we have them, the students have put together, they've been introduced to the concept, they've thought about their hometown, they've started looking ideas, and they've come up with something to really go forward. The next step, slide, that's the hard wink. Okay, here's just some of the results from the students. Is that putting together some illustrations and some things that make where they are and represent where they are looking at their communities and this is how they see them, and this is what they want to work on. So this came from some of our students who took this year in the HISTA project. That's Cedar Grove, and you know, they see the Mountaineer in that, and then you see Man, which is in southern West Virginia, and you know, embracing its hillbilly heritage, and then Smithers on the water, and there you can see you know, a nice water and mountains, very much another West Virginia scene, and the bucolic nature of the community and much of the state. Lauren? So when we had the students take this, the next step, we ran a contest, and the concept was for after, you know, if you went through this in HISTA, or you know, however we went through this, was we did a statewide pitch competition. Students from ages 9 to 18 were invited to submit a video about what makes their hometown cool and what could make it cooler. So essentially embodiment in a short period, a 3-minute video, the objectives of this learning exercise. The winning teams received a mini grant. We had 4 winners. We just held the competition, had a dozen entries, and at various points up to 40 teams expressed interest. And this is the first time we did it, so we really like the numbers. You know, they as you get teams that get interest, teams that start filling out the process, teams who actually submit, it decreases. But you know, we plan to continue. This is going to be an annual event. The key thing here is it must be youth led. They're going to have adult coaches, but the product itself must be done by the youth, and that is very important, because as we look toward the future, we look toward improving places, we want the people who are going to benefit from these improvements to be the ones who are leading them, or at least providing the ideas. And we saw that through some of the various projects that we have. And Lauren, we probably have time to play one real quick, and then I think we have to go to questions.
Do you all hear the sound?
I'm not getting any sound, Lauren.
No,
Okay.
have to switch it on to the,
While we're doing that, while we're getting that queued up, are there any questions so far? Because that's really where we're going to go.
In the coolest neighborhood ever. Greenmont! Greenmont isn't big, but it has a rich history and a lot to offer. Greenmont is the oldest neighborhood in Morgantown. We're going to show you why Greenmont is the coolest neighborhood and how much we love it. Here's some reasons why. We have history! This is Kearns Fort from 1772. We have the island and spring flowers. We have Kearns Crossing. This is a footbridge that connects Greenmont to downtown. We have the Rainbow Crosswalk. We have the Gnome Mural. We have the Greenmont Bears. We have a lending library. We have the Jeans Mural. We have the merry-go-round. Get your haircut at Studio 101. Get some freshly baked bread at Phoenix Bakery. Or go to Jeans. And hang out with friends at Morgantown's oldest bar. Get a new guitar at Cashland Pond. Wash your brother's clothes at the laundry. To identify properties that would be available for small businesses like this one. We propose a plan to allow buildings that once had a business in the past to become a business once again. We would love to have a small grocery, bookstore, arcade, or ice cream shop. Greenmont already rocks, but with your help, we can make our neighborhood a more livable, walkable community. Conrad, I'm really hungry. Let's go to Jean's for a hot dog.
Okay. I think we probably have time for like one quick question. I know we're basically at our time limit. Our information there, as well as the website, is available, and we'll put that in the chat. We'll put those links in the chat.
And
Good.
Mike, there's a question that came in through the chat, and it's
Okay.
from Jody. And are any of these communities using these videos as part of their marketing?
Not yet, but as we said, 4 of them were funded, and the one we showed actually was not funded. We're still trying to find a link for that, but that may be something that we get to in the future, because this, as I said, the contest only occurred last month, and at least a couple of them were very much about outreach and marketing the end result. So while it might not be used directly for their marketing, it may lead to more marketing materials. And the next step would be to have the kids who often did a much better job than we ever could of explaining their communities, be the spokespeople to move that forward.
Great, thank you so much.
And the link is in the chat.
As people have questions, please feel free to use that chat box. We're plugging right along going through the sessions, but it is hard to find that Q&A time. And so use that chat box, please. The next one is Training to be a Community Coach by Purdue University, Tanya Hall.
All right, well, good afternoon, everyone, or at least it's afternoon in Eastern time. So glad to see everyone this morning. So after this afternoon, excuse me. So I'm going to be co-presenting with my colleague, Tamara Ogle, and we are both community development extension educators for Purdue University. And as you can see today, we're going to be talking about training to be a community coach. And what we're going to be talking about today is really a couple of different elements related to why exactly are we creating something for training for community coaches? Secondly, what's the purpose of the program? What are some of the topics and skills that we are addressing through this program? And what are the next steps? And then, of course, we want to have some time for questions from all of you. So I'm going to turn it over to Tamara.
Thanks, Tanya. So in 2015, Tanya and I and others in our position had just been created, and we were undertaking this initiative with another university in our state and our Office of Community and Rural Affairs to do this large capacity building process with communities. And as part of that, we were taking this coaching role, this community coaching role. And while we had coached in communities informally, or some of our colleagues had in the past, this was really the first time where a lot of us were experiencing this role and thinking about what kind of skills do you need to be in a community coach? What really does that role look like, and how can we be the best community coach possible? And so we learned a lot from that experience and did some professional development as the program went on. But we kind of came to a point last year during the pandemic that Tanya and I were talking, and we felt like we were doing more and more community coaching, and we were seeing other community development practitioners outside of Extension in our state doing more community coaching, and how there really was a need to be able to connect these people or connect with each other and share resources and knowledge and have some continued professional development. And so the concept of coaching is not new, but there are limited resources for community coaching. And so one of the resources that we've used pretty widely is Mary Emery and Ken Hubble's Field Guide to Community Coaching. And we use that in the course that we've created. But we really felt, even with this field guide, that there was a need to kind of connect these resources and bring them to the attention of community development practitioners, as well as provide a space for co-learning. And so you learn so much from community coaching and working in communities in general, from making mistakes and having experiences. And so we really felt there was a need to get these people together and provide that opportunity to network and learn from one another. Tanya?
So what we created is what we termed the Community Coaching Learning Circle. And so we intentionally called it a learning circle because we want to learn together as a group. So in particular, what we wanted to establish was a baseline of what exactly is a community coach. Many times when we say the term community coach, people give us a questioning look like, what are you talking about? Because they're familiar with a life coach, maybe familiar with a sports coach, but they're not really familiar with a community coach. Then secondly, there's a lot of basic principles that we embody as a community coach, and we wanted to bring that to the surface, and then also discuss how they connect to each other. For example, talking about the community capitals, discussing the group development theories, thinking about the community change process, and then what is the role of the coach as they, lean upon that foundational knowledge, and how do they utilize that to their advantage. And then as a coach, we all have different skill sets that we bring to the table, but sometimes we don't always take the time to assess those skills and understand where can we grow. And so this program has an opportunity for that assessment to be done. Ultimately, when participants finish the course, we want them to be able to have a community coaching philosophy. And the purpose of this is that many times as educators, we get asked to engage with communities in many different ways, and we don't always know when to say yes or to say no. And having a philosophy would help you have a better understanding of when is it a good fit for you as a community coach, and when it may not be a good fit, and you can say no. And then ultimately, we wanted to build the confidence of our colleagues, as who work in this space, and then also have a network of other individuals. I mean, I think Tamara and I can speak from experience. It's been many times that we've been in a community coaching role, and we'll call each other up and say, hey, I'm in this situation, what would you recommend? And so we wanted to foster that level of a community coaching group together. So with that being said, the target audience for this program, really is anyone who's involved in the process of guiding groups, particularly community groups, but they also need to have an element or a good foundational knowledge of facilitation. So this could be extension educators or agents like ourselves. It could also be community volunteers. It could be individuals who are in leadership roles in nonprofit organizations or different community groups or coalitions. But it can also be for individuals in the business context who are very actively involved in engaging within the community. Next slide. So when it comes to the format, how this works, it's actually entirely online, in that folks can register for the course, and then it's actually over a 12 weeks course. But every other week we meet in a Zoom meeting together as a group for a really small mini lecture. Then we have some small group activities. And we also make sure we have plenty of engagement where we have some conversations about what they have learned. So the online course is filled with readings. So building upon the existing work that's already out there in the landscape, but also videos that really, for some of the complex topics that are not easy to just read, we bring a video in or a podcast into the learning material. As I mentioned, we do have assessments, but we also have small group activities. So this could be groups within, we break up every cohort into 3 smaller groups, but then also within those groups, we break them into triads so that they can work together on a very specific topic and get some direct feedback from their colleagues. And as of right now, we are offering this 2 times a year. And so we had our first cohort back in the fall. And we'll talk next about what exactly is involved in some of the modules that we have.
Yeah, so just to give you an idea of what's in those 6 modules, the first 2 modules kind of focus on that context. So we start with kind of what is the role, the different roles that we play in communities as community development practitioners. What's the difference between process versus content? And then we also ask them to go through that skills assessment that's part of the field guide. So they can kind of think about, what do I want to focus on personally as we go through these next 12 weeks together? In module 2, we take a step back and look at community change processes and group development theories, both things that are very important for coaches to have a good understanding of as they work with different groups. And then if you've read through the field guide, there's 6, they break it down into 6 R's for community coaching. And so we spend the next few modules going through those R's. So module 3 is focused on readiness and relationships. And so we ask them to think about needs assessments and community readiness. And module 4 is focused more on reach and reflection. And then module 5, we focus on results and resilience. And so part of that is constructing their own evaluation tool and then getting feedback from that triad that they're working with. Module 6 is kind of our wrap-up module, and so we've asked them throughout the course to go through some self-reflection exercises, which culminates in them writing their community coaching philosophy. And I know for some of the people that went through the pilot, they mentioned that as they were filling out these self-reflection exercises, they're like, okay, what's this about? But then when you come to the end and you have this paragraph or 2 that describes what you feel like your role is as a coach and how you work with other coaches and communities. They expressed how valuable of a tool that was to go into a co-coaching experience and be able to share that with someone that you're coaching with, or to work with a community organization and say, hey, this is really what I'm here to offer you if I come in and coach with you. So they felt like in the end, that was really one of their favorite parts of the program. We also kind of use this module to think about all of those R's and all of the things that we've learned throughout the course to really dive into some case study examples as well. So I'm not going to read you these quotes, but this is from our pilot program, which was with extension educators across our different program areas. And one of the big things that sticks out to me, and I felt the same way, is when I first took on a role of a community coach, it was really a little bit of baptism by fire. I was just learning as I was going, and I was with others that were learning as they were going as well. And so this course really provided an opportunity for the participants, but also us as trainers, to step back and reflect on those experiences and spend some time kind of digesting that and thinking about what we need to do to be better coaches. So some of the things that we learned from this pilot is that the topic is really relevant. It's not just community development educators that work with community groups in this way. We had a lot of health and human science educators that work with coalitions, healthy food coalitions and things like this. And we had a lot of our own extension professionals that felt like they really were ready to learn and engage in this process. That experience in guiding and leading groups is critical. So we had a few people that joined that were newer to the profession and really hadn't worked with community groups at all yet. And so it's really important to have a little bit of that experience to draw on and think about as you go through some of the exercises. Everybody felt like the assessments were really valuable. So they really appreciated the coaching skills assessment. They appreciated kind of constructing some of their own tools and then getting feedback from their partners on that. And then another thing we noticed is that while a lot of our colleagues were doing community coaching in some aspect, there wasn't necessarily a lot of intentionality towards it. So they weren't necessarily thinking about what the role was that they were filling with each group and how that might be different than other roles that they take on with different groups. Another thing that we noticed was engagement was vital. So this is a long course for a professional development and extension with 12 weeks. And so it was really important that we included activities in the online work. So we used Padlet and Jamboard sometimes so that they were able to work with each other, or partnership activities. But also in the classes through those small groups, engaging continually and having that opportunity to build relationships was really important to getting everyone through that 12 weeks engaged. The other thing was our groups wanted to stay together. And so they asked at the end if we could keep meeting. And we said, well, we're trying to, build this course out and get it to a larger audience. But we did start kind of a quarterly meeting of these community coaching alumni where they can get together and learn about a topic just briefly, but then also spend some time in discussion or networking if there's issues that they've come across and they want to have that conversation with the group.
So I see a couple questions in the chat, and we'll get to that in just a moment. So some of the next steps of where we're at now is like I mentioned, we had a first cohort in the fall of 2020. Go ahead and go to the next slide if you don't mind, Tamara. And that was intentionally only for Purdue Extension because we were trying this out, we were testing it, we were trying to see, what bugs there were, and there were some bumps along the way that we figured out. And so we've been spending this winter and spring updating the course. To be honest with you, we had planned to have another cohort this spring, but the update took a little bit longer than what we had originally anticipated. So we are going to have another cohort this fall, starting August 30th through November 8th, and we are opening it up to everyone at this point in time. So it's not just for Purdue Extension, but it can be for any educators across the country, but also for some of the public individuals as well that I mentioned earlier, such as the business leaders, business engagement folks, or coalition leaders, things of that nature. So as you can see on the screen, we do have a cost for the professional development. We don't have a link at this present moment. We have one that's so close to being released, but it's not quite there yet. But so contact either Tamara or I for more information, because that link probably will be live in the next week, or possibly even yet this week. So hopefully that answered some of the questions that we have in the chat.
So, and I'll just, while you are looking at the chat, I'll give you some time to read that. I just wanted to note that we're not doing this by ourselves. We've got a great team that are working with us, and several of them are on today. So turn on your cameras if you're here. But Crystal Van Pelt, Cindy Barber, Patty Keating, and Krista Poland are helping with us, helping us create this course. The fun thing about working with this team is it really was Tanya, Cindy, and myself that worked on the pilot. Patty, Krista, and Crystal went through that pilot. And so they were able to join us after the fact and really help us understand when we were modifying the course, understand their perspective as a participant. So it's been fun to work with them.
So I see a question in the chat talking about a certificate or a credential that could come from the course itself. At this present time, we do not have a credential that comes out of it. We are still discussing, what does a certificate mean? So I'm actually on the workforce development team within Extension as well, trying to unpack what is the value of a certificate and what does that really mean? So that is still in progress and trying to figure out what exactly can we provide, and then what is really the currency of that, certificate, whatever they receive. So if you have suggestions or things that you have seen work well within your program that, when they complete something like this, let me know, because I'm very interested in seeing what could be relevant. It's one thing to generate a certificate and say, hey, you went through it. But if it doesn't really mean anything beyond, let's say, Extension or beyond like Purdue, then it doesn't really have much value in another state. So I'm interested if you have any feedback in that space.
Yeah, so right now we're working with our Purdue Online non-credit division. And so there isn't graduate credit or credit for the course itself, but they do get a Purdue Online certificate.
Any other questions?
Okay, so at this point, feel free to continue to give questions to Tamara and Tanya. And we have about 10 minutes for questions for all the presenters. There was a question that came in for the second session, and it was about the number of participants in that program. And so feel free to continue to plug your questions into the chat or raise your hand and we'll call on you and you can unmute yourself and ask questions to all the presenters today.
So in regards to Nancy's question about the number of participants we had, there were 800 plus HISTA students who went through the program. As far as the video portion is concerned, we had 40 individuals express interest, so representing a team. 24 started the application process, and we ultimately had 12 teams submit videos. And I don't know what the total number was. It was under 50, somewhere between 40 and 50 total people with those 12 teams.
60 actually.
60, okay. Well, there you go. That's why it takes 3 of us.
You should see us try to put a light bulb in.
And I love the positive encouragement coming in through the chat too. These were wonderful presenters and presentations today. And it's so wonderful to hear about the awesome programs happening nationwide. Any other questions?
Hey, I have a question. Can I go?
Yes.
Okay, can you hear me? Hello, everybody. I'm Cynthia Aguilar with NC State, and I just want to echo, the nice work about that great work that you had done. I really enjoyed learning from you. My question is going back to the the session that I participated earlier about diversity and inclusion, I was curious how diverse was the groups that you engage with, and if you learned that there is the specific programs or approaches may need to be different depending on their target group, or anyhow, any experience or idea that you can share with us about the integration of diverse groups in these type of programs.
I can chime in on what we did. So the HISTA program in West Virginia, I'll drop a link into the chat, was our partner for that reason. That was one of the reasons they were our partner, because they are an organization that does an amazing job of engaging a diverse audience across the state, and they're located in 26 counties. And basically how they operate is they enroll minority and first generation college students in a 4-year program through high school. And if they successfully complete benchmarks with the support from their designated teacher, they get a full scholarship to any West Virginia university that's accepting the waiver, which is several. So we kind of partnered with that program directly so that we were sure to reach a broad audience as well. And then some other things that we did, the videos themselves, and I think we'll even do a better job of this next time, can also be an equity issue because higher income students have better access to technology and equipment to make videos with better picture and sound. And the more rural the community or the more low income the area that we're targeting, we know that those videos look different. So we intentionally, our rubric for judging the videos didn't focus on video quality, but rather the idea itself for the judges. And we kind of instructed judges to make sure that we weren't weighting videos for higher resource students as opposed to lower resource. We were grading the idea. But we also got some, great ideas from our team members on how to do that better next year, because that is, always a challenge and something we want to be striving to improve as we work to reach people across the state.
Also, I did HISTA, the program this was also dealt with, targets. Did you mention the HISTA targeting? Okay, sorry. I didn't, it flew right by. You hear it so often. Just wanted to make sure that was out there.
This will just be that awkward silence for when people are chewing on the content going, oh, what are my questions?
I could probably say a quick word about diversity from our first talk.
Sure.
Right, so actually age is also a dimension of diversity. So a lot of the methods that we were piloting can be applied in terms of multiple types of diversity, in terms of ethnicity, immigrant status, not only age, but family composition, in all different kinds of ways. So it's a method, we're talking about designing public space. So it's not only public spaces for young people or young families or whatever, but it's a way to have everybody's voice in and leaning in. And the philosophy in terms of a broader diversity perspective is one of social justice. I mean, if we look at, it's very consistent. If we look at, some of the discussion and debate about which landmarks should be out there, which parts of the history of a community should be honored, it gets very nasty. But if there's a process in place for people to share where they're coming from and how important it is to their own identity, generational identity, cultural identity, it promotes more of a sense of community cohesion and less conflict. So it's really a process. We're very process oriented in our idea of civic engagement. It's not one generation or one group of any kind, but really trying to negotiate as opposed to, I'm going to shout out my position in a public domain, which doesn't really lead to what we want to see. Thank you.
If I can add, actually, that's what I thought when I heard your presentation and the three of them, how maybe that focus is if we do intergeneration, so we can integrate diversity in regards to race and ethnicity, because it may be less intimidated. We think, okay, this is an intergeneration focus. It's not about race, it's not about ethnicity, which we know it could be challenging. So I really love that idea. Thank you.
Thanks. And it does come down to race and ethnicity many times. If you look at the waves of immigration into many communities, there's a generational discontinuity as well as racial and ethnic. So, methods like food, dance, public events, and so on, to see the joys and the assets of each other's cultures and curiosity and ways of using technology, it's just a very beautiful way to build community.
Mm-hmm. Can we probably have time for one more question? And this has been a nice, rich discussion, so thank you. And I have a question for the second presentation, My Hometown is Cool, about the technology and access and internet and equity there. What next steps were you thinking about taking to try to equalize those challenges?
So were you going to speak, Daniel?
Yeah, go ahead.
So one quick thing is just making sure that we're really intentional with our communication from the front with the team. So that's not going to be a heavy factor in terms of the scoring of the application. So it doesn't discourage those who would otherwise enter from entering, because if they feel their video is not going to have a high enough production quality, would that result in less entries, if they don't have the access to tech? And two, we've talked about potentially working to connect them more with our county-based extension offices. We have one office in all 55 counties of the state. So, could we have access to technology or assistance through those county-based offices for teams that are or are not engaged with extension? Could, still setting a time to go in and get help through that county-based office. So we're lucky to still have that system. So looking at how we can take advantage of our physical location in all the communities around the county, around the state.
Also, we've talked about making sure, increasing training for participants, because we literally had to throw one out because you couldn't hear the sound. And that, there's a certain level of video quality. We know that some of these are going to be shot on iPhones and some are going to be shot on cameras, so we can account for that. But when you couldn't hear the sound, that's a problem. Ironically, it was over still photographs, so that this particular place probably had capabilities to do editing, which relates to the second piece. When you're connecting them with technology, is also trying to connect them with free software that you can you go to the library and use. So there's things out there. It's just making sure people are aware of them, so they don't necessarily have to have the best. We're not looking at video quality, but it does have to be understandable, and that's so we will strive to do even a better job at that this next time.
That's like the learning curve we've all been on, and now we're teaching others to do the same. So,
right.
Any final thoughts? We're coming up at our noon marker, at least Mountain Time. Okay, thank you so much for the presenters, and thank you all for the really rich, wonderful discussion. Have a good conference.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you.